Think about the last time you left a conversation feeling smaller than when you walked in. You couldn't explain it exactly. Nothing obviously terrible happened, but something was off. And the longer you spent replaying it, the more you noticed that this particular feeling tends to follow a particular person. Every time. Most of us were never taught to identify the personalities that quietly erode the people around them. We were taught to be kind, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to assume the best. And those are good instincts until they become the exact mechanism someone else uses to keep you confused, off balance, and coming back for more. So here are 6 dangerous personality types you should know how to recognize. Because the most important thing about each of them is that they rarely look dangerous at first. 1. The chronic invalidator. Do you know someone who has a way of making your feelings feel like an overreaction? Not through cruelty, through a kind of quiet, reasonable-sounding logic that leaves you wondering if you were ever right to feel what you felt in the first place. The chronic invalidator doesn't attack your emotions directly. They reframe them. You're being too sensitive. That's not what I meant. I think you're reading too much into it. Each statement, individually, sounds like a correction. But over time, the pattern does something specific to the people on the receiving end. It trains them to distrust their own internal experience. Psychologists call this gaslighting when it's deliberate, but it doesn't have to be intentional to cause damage. Some people invalidate reflexively because their own emotional world is one they've never been taught to sit with. The effect on you is the same either way. The sign you're dealing with this type isn't one conversation. It's the pattern of walking away from conversations with this person and immediately doubting what you know you experienced. 2. The constant competitor. This one is easy to miss because it often arrives wearing the face of ambition or humor. Everything you share becomes a comparison. Your good news triggers their better news. Your struggle somehow reminds them of a harder struggle they once had. You can't quite celebrate anything in this person's presence without feeling, faintly, like you lost something. The constant competitor isn't always aware they're doing it, but awareness doesn't change the impact. All relationships are supposed to create space for both people. This personality type quietly occupies all of it, not through aggression, but through an inability to let anything belong to you without also belonging to them. If you've started filtering what you share with someone because you already know how the comparison is going to land, that filter is information. 3. The manufactured victim. There is a meaningful difference between someone who has been genuinely hurt and someone who has learned that being hurt is the most reliable way to control a room. The manufactured victim is never at fault. Every conflict has an explanation that returns somehow to their suffering. Every attempt to raise a concern gets redirected toward their pain instead. And over time, the people around them stop raising concerns at all, because the emotional cost of doing so is simply too high. This is one of the more difficult types to identify because genuine suffering and manufactured suffering can look identical from the outside. The distinguishing pattern is what happens when you try to address a problem directly. With a person who is genuinely hurting, honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, usually lands somewhere. With a manufactured victim, every honest conversation becomes about them before it finishes becoming about anything else. 4. The selective charmer. Pay attention to how someone treats people they don't need anything from. The selective charmer is warm, engaging, and generous. To the right audience, to waitstaff, to people with nothing to offer them, but to anyone outside the social circle they're performing for. The warmth disappears, and what replaces it is something worth noticing. Impatience, dismissiveness, a kind of casual contempt that they don't bother concealing because they don't see any reason to. The reason this type is dangerous is that their charm is real enough to be genuinely convincing. They are skilled at making the people they want to impress feel uniquely seen. But charm that is selective is, by definition, not about you. It is about what you represent in a particular moment. And that distinction matters. Watch how they treat the people in the room they're not trying to impress. That version is closer to the truth. 5. The empathy extractor. This person comes to you consistently, urgently, and in need. And you help. Because you care. Sunks, because you're the kind of person who shows up. Because the need always sounds real enough to justify the response. The pattern you eventually notice is that the flow only moves in one direction. When you are the one struggling, the conversation somehow returns to them. Your problems become launching pads for their problems. Your support is something they accept as a baseline, not something they think to return. Empathy extractors are not always malicious. Some have simply never been taught that relationships require reciprocity. But the effect on the person doing all the giving is a slow, specific depletion, the kind that makes you feel guilty for feeling drained, because the other person always seems to need so much more than you do. And if you feel more exhausted after supporting someone than you do after most other things in your life, that exhaustion is a signal, not a character flaw. That distinction between guilt and legitimate depletion is one worth saving. The next time you feel selfish for having nothing left to give, come back to it. 6. The identity shifter. This is the most disorienting type on this list, and the hardest to name while you're inside it. The identity shifter is a different person depending on who they're with, not in the normal, healthy way that all of us code switch slightly between contexts, in a way that leaves you genuinely uncertain about which version is real. They agree with everyone. They mirror the values and interests of whoever they're currently trying to win over. And when you try to pin down who they actually are beneath all of it, the answer keeps moving. What makes this dangerous isn't dishonesty in the conventional sense. It's that over time, proximity to someone without a stable identity starts to destabilize your own. You find yourself adjusting to accommodate a version of them that keeps shifting. You lose track of what you were before you started adapting. And by the time you notice something is wrong, you're not entirely sure who moved. The watch-through reward here is this. You cannot have a real relationship with a performance. And if someone has never stopped performing long enough for you to meet them, the connection you feel is with a mirror, not a person. None of these types announce themselves. That's the entire problem. And they arrive looking like someone you might want to keep close. And the damage accumulates quietly. In the small ways you stop trusting yourself, stop sharing, stop expecting to be met. Recognizing the pattern is not the same as writing someone off, but it is the beginning of making a clear-eyed decision about what you're actually in and what it's actually costing you. If this video named something you've been trying to describe for a while, hit the like button. That specific relief of finally having the language for a dynamic you've been living inside. That's what this channel is here for. The people who watch content like this, who are willing to examine their relationships honestly instead of just enduring them, that's who this channel was built for. Subscribing is how you keep going deeper. Is there someone in your life who fits more than one of these types? Send this to the person who needs the framework, not the warning. The pattern beneath all 6 of these types, why certain personalities are drawn to specific dynamics, and how those dynamics form in the first place. That's what the next video goes into directly. Stopping here would mean missing the part that actually explains the how. One question before you go. Which of these 6 did you recognize immediately? And was it someone in your life, or a pattern you've noticed in yourself at times? Write it in the comments. The honesty in this comment section tends to be the kind you don't find many other places.